This episode is sponsored by Hero Schedule. If your department needs better scheduling software that isn't outdated, clunky, and expensive, Hero Schedule is an easy switch. It's $4 per user per month, and they give you a free 30-day trial. Get started at heroschedule.com and click on Try Hero Schedule.
It's exciting, exhilarating. It gives you that burst of adrenaline. I mean, we train you from day one of stress inoculation in the Stress Academy to get used to this feeling and get good at operating in this feeling.
That drive home, we can handle that. We can utilize that in way different ways. So if you don't drive a work car home, then you should consider unplugging from cop type stimulus, right? And figure out what helps you towards Zen or whatever that calm thing is. And then when you're so focused on safety, it doesn't align with the things that would make you successful in relationships, in family life, as a parent, as a spouse, as a partner.
And it's really easy to get yourself sucked into kind of that victim mindset. You know, this department doesn't care about me, and you spend all of this time and energy just being upset.
Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tum. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today we're doing another gritty panel, and we're addressing specifically off-duty challenges. So that is a lot of what we deal with as first responders, and that's the quote-unquote turning it off. You know, how do we go from the day-to-day uniform personnel thing to being a normal person again, being a family member, being a spouse, being a partner, being a community member, a quote-unquote civilian. And we know it's not simple. It's not the same as other jobs or vocations or careers. This is something that permeates how you interact with the world and certainly look at the world. And so I'm super excited to bring this array of a panel with a lot of professional, personal insights that hits on this from so many angles. Why don't we start with returning guest, Mark Bouchard. Mark, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Mark Bouchard. I'm about a 17-year member up here in Canada. So did 14 years with Delta Police and now about in my fourth year with the RCMP. And I just started in the National Tactical Medicine Program.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark. And I will have all the details and episodes in the show notes. I'm not going to throw a lot of numbers at you right now. But Mark's interviewed me. I've interviewed him. We've chatted with Seb Lavoie. So please look in the show notes and check that out. Next returning guest, we have Dr. Medina. Doctor,
Hi.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. So I am a Dr. Medina Baumgart. I'm a licensed psychologist out here in California and board certified specialist in police and public safety psychology. I work full time as an embedded psychologist with a large agency out here in Southern California. And then I am married to a now retired police officer. We've been together for 23 years.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Fantastic. And Deana, our new guest, very active in the space, online space, social media as well, cop shrink. Deana, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Deana Kahle, and I am located in Southern California, but I work all over the United States. Not yet work in Canada. Looking forward to an opportunity there. I am a contractor and provide mental health services to public safety agencies. I get the opportunity to work with 250 plus public safety agencies, anywhere from local, state, and federal. And I do three different things. I do critical incident stress management on major mass casualties, all the way down to lethal force encounters, officer-involved shootings. I am an instructor, so I'm an AICC certified post instructor, and I teach at Basic Academy as well as advanced officer training. And I am a clinician, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. And I see 90% are first responders, not just law enforcement, but also fire service as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Deana. And thank you all for what you do for the culture, for the community, for the space of first responders, first responder wellness, books, the content you all put out. And we're going to talk about that all at the end where people find out where they can find you. This prompt came from listeners, followers. It's a topic that's come up a couple times, which I really love that it came up, right? Because it's something that I continually grapple with. I think it's something that responsibly we all recognize, we all grapple with, even civilians that just have to turn work off, right? Switch into family mode, what have you, right? Like you're not at work and yet your mind is right there. And so we recognize that in first responder life, that can affect us in a dramatic way. I actually love, as I shared with a couple of you before we started recording, that we got this question from somebody that I've been interacting with that just got hired in the region, right? So it's someone I connected with in a very kind of serendipitous way while I was at work. And he came up to me and just kind of asked me about testing. And I was like, man, you've asked the right guy. Like I was just there and just coming out of recruiting and doing all the social media. So turned him onto the page on the podcast. And I love that he asked this specifically, essentially in this way, but how do you deal with hypervigilance? And he hasn't even been to the academy yet, right? So super squared away. Shout out to Andy. But I know that this is a topic that is going to help everybody, whether you are starting to come in, like a lot of listeners are, or whether you're mid-career or you're nearing retirement, which is a great audience that I love interacting with because you're going to go there. And when you hang up the uniform and the badge, you're going to deal with this notion of hypervigilance and going out in the world and then not being a cop in a different way. So I kind of want to set the stage that way. And maybe I'll pick on Deana or Dr. Medina first, but try to offer some context for maybe the newer listeners that aren't super familiar with what exactly it is we're talking about. They might have a general notion of what hypervigilance is from hearing it, but why is it so prevalent for uniformed personnel, especially police officers?
So I like to think about it like law enforcement essentially have to balance between two worlds, right? So the one is the cop world, and that is, the on-the-job training and experience conditions you, your brain and body, your nervous system to operate from a place of protection. You're constantly having to scan and be on guard and watch, and that is for your safety, right? So that needs to be there. It's functional in that setting. And then on the other side of that, in the other world, it's the off-duty family, personal life. And that needs to operate from a place of connection. So in order to connect, right, we can't have the walls up. We have to be vulnerable. And one of the challenging things is on the work end, especially with job demands, people can be at work more than at home. And most of the training's invested on how to stay safe at work, not so much on how to bounce back at home. And so it's difficult to switch because vulnerability activates that fight or flight. Uh-oh, this is dangerous. And understanding that there's different biological responses that happen. So this isn't just in your head. Your body actually becomes trained and conditioned, much like a muscle group does when you go to the gym. And so it's like if you exercise that muscle group over and over and over again, when the stuff hits the fan, or your default mode is always going to revert to that stronger muscle group.
Yeah, I think that's
Oh,
so well put in that kind of diametrically opposed, I suppose, circumstance, right? Where you need to focus on safety, like your literal physical safety. That is not most jobs, right? We know that. And
Mhm.
then when you're so focused on safety, it doesn't align with the things that would make you successful in relationships, in family life, as a parent, as a spouse, as a partner.
Yeah.
So no, thank you for that, Doctor.
Yeah.
Deana.
yeah, we have a very similar perspective. That's exactly what I teach as the foundation to understanding why this hypervigilance exists and why you struggle at home. Because even though maybe skills on the job are transferable, your nervous system is still stuck in the state of this safety, this fight or flight. I would only add to that, just to sort of expand on that, is when you're up in that fight or flight and in that hypervigilant state on the job, it feels good because you're competent, you're confident. It's exciting, exhilarating. It gives you that burst of adrenaline. I mean, we train you from day one of stress inoculation in the Stress Academy to get used to this feeling and get good at operating in this feeling. And then you said it so beautifully, Dr. Medina, that when you get home, it's a vulnerable state and you're not operating in the same conditions. You're not in charge anymore. You don't have to be assessing for threat. And the aspect of this feeling really good and competent and confident is when you get home, it feels boring and dull and irritating and annoying. And you step on a Lego and you want to burn the house down. It's like you can't control it all because you're not in control of this scene, this scenario. So it makes it incredibly challenging.
You hit it right there, and all the heads were shaking and some smirks, right, when you said, well, it feels good, like that adrenaline, you get that dopamine. Like, a lot of us are thrill seeking in one way or another, or maybe in many ways, which is what drew us to this, I'll say, pretty uncommon and crazy job, right? A lot of people, a lot of supportive folks out in the community are like, I can't do what you do. Like, and sometimes they even go so far to say, like, you're nuts. You're nuts to do what you do in today's climate and all the danger, all that, close friends and family, right? Like, so we know there is a little bit of that crazy bone in sometimes really positive ways. Yeah. Mark, what do you have?
The first thing I'll start out with is we're kind of drawing on some of Gilmartin's stuff, right? So for anyone listening, if you haven't read Kevin Gilmartin's Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, get that book. It'll really help you. Like, I've read it a ton of times. I still read it. I give it to all my recruits I've had and buddies on my teams and stuff. So seriously, if you haven't read it, go get that book. And really what I think we're talking about is when our safety sense basically can become maladaptive. And I'll give you an example. But for me, I still like scan every intersection. I'm good with that. I've been to enough deadly crashes. That's like a weirdly hypervigilant thing that might keep my family safe one day. And I'm okay doing it. But when it comes to the point of, like, I come home and I clear my house 7 times in the middle of the night and I check my locks all the time, that's not adaptive. Like, I'd say it's now become maladaptive. So being able to recognize which parts of those we want to keep and which parts we don't. To bring it back to Gilmartin, he has a concept there called the biological roller coaster. So really what we're talking about, to use a little bit of scientific term, is like sympathetic activation, where you're jacked up, right? Your heart rate's up, your safety, and you need that. That's what keeps you safe. But just like you need that to keep you safe, you need to learn how to actually activate the opposite, which is your parasympathetic nervous system. And you can choose to find ways to actually activate it. And like, our body basically has homeostasis. It wants to find a normal balance. So if we go around always jacked up, always waiting for the ninja to jump out of the closet and attack us, it's not good for us. It's not good for our long-term health. It's not good for our family. And I know it because I lived it. I've been there at the concert, scanning around, trying to find where someone's coming to kill me from. It wasn't good for me. It's not good for my family. And so having recently just taught some cadets, I say, hey man, it feels like the hard part when you start is learning how to turn it on. But what you need to do is learn how to have like a little ritual. You learn how to turn it on when you go to work. You learn how to turn it off when you leave. There's a program called Before Operational Stress, and they have a term they use called functional disconnection and functional reconnection. And essentially that's kind of what they're saying, is learn how to like disconnect a little bit emotionally when you need to, but then also reconnect when you go home and reconnect with your family because they need you.
Yeah, that's huge. And you covered a lot of ground, and I want to rewind a little bit, Mark. I love this conversation. I knew it was going to be good because as everyone's speaking, everyone else is just nodding decently rapidly, right? Because it's resonating, it's really hitting. And something you said earlier about that maladaptive behavior, right? I love the example you gave because I think that will resonate with a lot of people. It resonated with me. I believe this might have been our first phone conversation, man, where we talked about the ninjas coming out, right? Like, not everyone's trying to kill you, but we can internalize and recognize responsibly that you can be in a very non-dangerous situation and start looking for the danger. And I think that there's a healthy balance of that, right? Most cops are like, well, we need to be aware. We don't want to be ignorant or naive. But at the same time, there's just that awareness that something could happen, or there's the the preparedness or the belief that something will happen in your body and your brain, and all these things are activating differently. If you truly believe that someone's going to jump out of the closet, what that keys in for me is that mindfulness, so you can build the awareness if something is maladaptive. And yeah, I want to open that up and ask the room how you can work on that piece, right? Because the first way, or the first step for fixing something or working on something, is awareness and recognition, right?
That
Yeah.
is the secret sauce. You should see my notes. That's the very first thing I wrote was mindfulness. We are so disconnected from our bodies, and our modern day society kind of demands that we're disconnected, because that keeps us in go 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 mode. It keeps us in on guard mode, and it keeps us in this operational, right, looking for ninjas to jump out of the closet. But when we connect into our bodies, we can be aware of what's happening. Oh, my breath quickened. Oh, my chest got tight. Oh, my stomach got, like, I had a little drop in there. I felt a little adrenaline spike. Oh, that's interesting. And my shoulders are up to my ears. And just noticing with awareness and curiosity, we can reconnect with our bodies and do that all the time, and just check in on a regular, constantly. It becomes a habit the more you do it, but no one ever taught us that.
Hmm.
We didn't learn this in school, which I find fascinating. Why not? Um, but it's becoming more a conversation, a topic of conversation, and certainly much more palatable. It used to be, I think, this mysterious, like, what is this meditation and
Fuzzy
mindfulness? And what does
wuzzy,
that mean?
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
that fuzzy wuzzy.
Yeah, the woo
Yeah.
woo. And I'm like, oh, no, no. It's like, do you know you're hungry? How do you know you're hungry? Oh, you feel it in your stomach. There, we got something. All right, you're
Mhm.
connecting with your body, right? And I will just
Yeah.
expand that to everything else.
Yeah. And I think too, the just to piggyback, because you said it so well, it's understanding, and cops like to be in control, right? So it's understanding your body, why it's doing what it's doing, and how to switch those modes to regain control. And
Right.
I'm a huge proponent of breathing. I think that is the body's love language. I always say, between the brain and body, it's like a 2-lane highway. Sometimes, when the brain's going, you can stop and be like, okay, just everything's fine. I'm at home. I'm not at work. Just kind of calm things down. And sometimes you're able to talk yourself through it. But really, about 20% of the communication goes from the brain down to the body. So if you're trying to tell yourself that, but your body is in this activated fight or flight, yucky state, it's going to override every single time. And so the most efficient way, I say it's simple but not easy, way to make that happen and activate that parasympathetic system is breathing. And understanding too, in addition to hypervigilance, cops are, I go on ride-alongs and my brain hurts after, because there's like 2 or 3 different radio channels going. There's scanning, there's, looking at intersections, there's all of these things going. So it's the hypervigilance piece, but then it's like your system is just bombarded with
Yeah.
so much stimuli, and it's
Yeah.
not meant to do that. And so a
Right.
lot of times cops will relax, right, in air quotes, by like zonking out on social media. I'm like, that's not relaxing. Like having
Right.
some
Right.
sort of, I call it, my husband likes the TV on, right? The emotional support background noise. I call it. It's so hard just to like teach your body to be still.
Yep. And
Yeah.
going back to that, it feels good. It
Mm-hmm.
feels good to be activated and engaged and in that sympathetic nervous system, because I feel in control,
Mm-hmm.
right? It
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
vulnerable and weak when
Yeah.
I'm relaxed and connected, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, something that came up earlier too, and I think that this is something that the profession or professions select for, or we also self-select for towards the professions, but that sense of purpose and that activity level, right? We said a lot of times we're chasing the action, but the action might be like the exciting movie level quality action, but it also might be that, I'll just call it busyness. And I'm purposely calling it busyness because busyness isn't really good, right? Productivity can be good, and being intentional and being accomplishing tasks and meaningful engagements can be good. but busyness is not. And so I love that example about the scrolling, right? Because we can recognize that social media, which we're all active on it to some degree, all four of us, we trying to use our powers for good, but we get sucked in, right? It's built for that, right? The algorithms are trying to give you all this hyper, like you're shoving all this stimulus at you at like the fastest rate possible is essentially what it is. So it's not helping you down regulate or do anything. I recognize for myself personally that if I use a page or I start looking at like Instagram, pretty quickly I'm going to see something, although I try not to actively follow things that make me upset. I'm going to see something that makes me upset.
Mhm.
I'm going to see something that's body cam. And even if I just keep scrolling past, I'm like, well, I'm not trying to look at body cam at 10 p.m., as I quote unquote wind down. Like something's triggered in me because I know it's something with action. I know it's something where an officer was in an unsafe position. And so I feel that elevate. And then I recognize, well, this is not helpful, but I'm maybe suggesting and thinking out loud that maybe it's too late, right? If I'm trying to have a restful night, like that may have hit me in some way to affect my sleep negatively. So as we talk about things like down regulating and breath work, Mark, what are some things that have helped you? And when you talk to those recruits, how do we help young folks and seasoned cops, what have you, try to recognize these things? Because I think for most of us, we can hear something and be like, yeah, that makes sense. And then we just keep going on with our day to day and our week to week, year to year.
Yeah, I think part of it's giving us permission. Like it is that awareness, education piece, and I'd say there's an element of setting the culture. And Eric, I'll commend you, and I've said this before, but like you do such a great job of that because you have kind of a line to walk in between two things. One is like, this is real, and here's my stories, and I've been there, done that, and it's been real. But two is like, you still got to find a way to be a healthy, balanced person through that. That's a really hard balance. And I know people where they've been through hard stuff and they're very much on the other side, on the extreme hypervigilance, even some people I'm super close with, to the point they can't let go. So really, what is it? Someone, I apologize, I'm not sure who it was, but mentioned the breath work earlier. And man, like normalizing that's not woo woo, that's smart. Like understand your biology. It is the key between your body and your mind. You have all this stress going on, and it is the one thing that you can intentionally choose to do. For anybody out there going, oh, I don't know if I should try it. I will say when I did my emergency response course, like our room clearing, which is our SWAT course up here in Canada, our national one, I was sitting there focusing on my breathing before my scenarios. Like
Yeah.
this is me knowing I can lower my heart rate because here's what's happening. Your heart rate's getting jacked up, right? That back to Gil Martin, um, the high end of the biological roller coaster. There's actually some research out there. Simon Baldwin and some associates, I forget the other name of the authors, but they showed heart rates for the officers, like going to legit calls. You're sitting there, your heart beating 180. You're just driving to a call, right? It's that psychological stress. And how do you think that impacts you tomorrow when you've had a whole night of that homeostasis? Your body is like a boomerang. Now you're going the other way. So intentionally choosing to use your breath, to use nature. So that'd be one good way, Eric, to draw back to your question. For me, like looking at the sunset sounds really small. Man, it was powerful. That helped me with my nightmares. That helped my body to regulate. Using heat. So I've started doing like cold plunges. I bought a sauna, especially if I have a sauna before I go to bed. Man, that really helps me. Also, connection with others. Like you go back to another great book, like The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Van der Kolk. What a great book. But he basically says connection is our number one protective factor from trauma. So you're going to go out and you're going to be all jacked up. You can see all these tough things. What you need is to connect with others, even though it's often not what you feel like in the moment, but it will help you. So I'd say start with those few things, a bit of nature, a bit of temperature, and a bit of connection with others. And man, that'll take you a long way.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Doctor, anything you want to riff off that?
So I was thinking about Gil Martin and kind of that transition home and, that biological roller coaster that he talks about where it's like kind of the extreme up and then everything crashes. And then it takes 18 to 24 hours to come back up. And then you're up here and then everything crashes. And that kind of ping pong between the highs and the crashes contributes to a lot of those physical health issues. And how great would it be to help your body biologically ease into it because when it crashes down, and this is something I didn't understand for a long time with my husband, is, he's coming home. I know he's worked a long day, so I know that he's tired, but it's so much more than that. It was, I'm wanting to greet him at the door. I'm so glad you're safe. You made it home. And I want to talk to him about my day. And he's like, please stop talking. And, for a while it was just okay, he's worked a long day. It's okay. It's okay. I understand. But when that happens day in and day out for 3 months, 6 months, a year and a half, it's like, well, hold on. We're in a relationship and I can't connect with you if all I'm getting is the exhausted, grumpy guy coming home. I'll give you your decompression time, but we got to find a way to make this work, and integrating some of those things to help your biology ease down into it. Even at the end of shift, get that process started. So on the drive home, you're already partway there, and have that decompression routine when you get home. So you're ready to, and you have the physiological capacity to re-engage.
Yep. I love that, Dr. Medina. So that drive home, we can handle that. We can utilize that in way different ways. So if you don't drive a work car home, then you should consider unplugging from cop type stimulus, right? And figure out what helps you towards Zen or whatever that calm thing is. Is it a fascinating podcast that's hopefully not true crime, because we're talking about these things that may elicit some sort of emotion and response? Maybe it's classical music, maybe it's Bob Marley, whatever your thing is. I actually have a former boss that would share that after his, this is a police boss, but he would say that he would actually turn it to silent. Like he would cut everything off and he would use that to kind of let himself, be mindful, right? Like what's on his mind. But he would actually, I think this is a pretty platinum standard, and I try to work on this myself, but he would think about each member in his family, right? His wife and his 3 different kids, and be like, what does this kid, kid A, oldest kid or middle kid, what does each kid need from me when I get home? And he would try to conceptualize that. I mean, that is like a very wise approach, but I mean, that's what our kids' memories are going to be of, is like how we came home. And I don't know better. I'm trying to work towards, acting better, because I feel myself get sucked into the mood of the day, or being so dejected from something at work, or being so stressed out with an email that I probably shouldn't have been even checking on my work phone while I'm still at home, like at the start of the day. And so I share that just to offer that up. Deana, anything else that you'd like to add on to that when you think about people being open to things to help them kind of decompress outside of work, but also like maybe at work as they're going through their day?
So many great things you guys have just shared. I was thinking about the benefit of biofeedback. I mean, and so many people are wearing smartwatches or some sort of data collection on their bodies. I don't personally do that, but a lot of people do. And you can use that to your advantage. Like, check it. What's your heart rate? Check it. Back to that mindfulness of being aware and noticing of what's happening in your body and utilizing that. I love how you said, what you can do in the car. And I always know it's been a rough day when I turn it to silence. Like, it's a bad day when it's like, I can't hear one more thing. Just for a moment, the ride alongs, my brain gets overloaded. I do ride alongs monthly with various different departments. And initially I was like, I had to get my nervous system prepared. I'm like, I can't listen to all of these things. And then he's trying to talk to me, right? And I'm like, can we turn the radio down? Oh, yeah, I guess you got to listen to that. Like, it was like too much going on. And then the window was cracked and the air was moving in, and all of it. So I recognize how much of a hit that is to the nervous system. And again, they have to be so disconnected from their bodies because they might not be able to attend to it all right now. And they had to get good at drowning out extraneous. I use the body's cues as extraneous, but you could be stuck on a call or holding a perimeter or hooking up a deuce or something. sorry, you're not going to the bathroom. Sorry, you're not getting a bite to eat. Like, none of that's happening. So you have to turn it all off and ignore it all, right? So utilizing those biofeedback cues can be useful. I think particularly in that decompression time, that transition time home. And so much of what everyone has already shared, what's behind that is the intention. Like, when you set an intention of how you want to show up at home, then you get to direct that. Like, be intentional about, I am going to need some extra time. I'm going to need to have a little more silence. I'm going to need to take a shower, or I am starving. I don't even think I can engage with the family until I get food in my system. But be intentional with the way you want to show up with that. How are you going to have that initial conversation of asking for what you need before your spouse tosses the baby at you and says, I can't do this anymore? And you're like, oh, hold on. I'm going to need 10 minutes to wrap my brain around that. And setting that intention throughout your day as well. Again, back to the mindfulness of, how do you want to utilize this knowledge, this biofeedback that you're getting, to mindfully maneuver through the day. I really like gratitude is huge. By the way, gratitude is the single best predictor of well-being. Like, single best predictor of well-being. If you begin a gratitude practice, over time, it will become such a habit that you will just be living in gratitude all of the time. And this isn't the toxic positivity of saying, just look at everything as, through rose colored glasses. No, this is purposefully choosing things that are in your life that are beautiful and that you're grateful for. Like Mark, you said, looking at a sunset. I am a sky gasper. Like, 'cause I look at the sky and I go, oh my gosh, look how beautiful that is. And my daughter's like, stop it. You're freaking me out when you do that. But I've just been so trained to be so grateful for the beautiful skies. And we're in Southern California, so they're absolutely gorgeous. And that gratitude practice makes what you're going through and the hard times that you're going through, it makes it more manageable when you can off gas or offload or compensate with the things that are great, that you are grateful for. One more little thing about being in the car. Headspace is an app that I've been recommending for as long as it's been around, 15 plus years maybe. And now you can get it on like Spotify or whatever audio you can get. And they're like little 5-minute segments, and it'll be a little breathing practice, or it'll be a mindfulness practice, or it's all mindfulness, but it'll be a gratitude practice that it just walks you through. I even set my GPS to the Headspace voice, and then it'll give me okay, as you're driving, notice how your body feels. And it's just another like constant reminder that you can take advantage of.
Yeah. I love a lot. I mean, we covered a lot of ground, and everyone hit on biofeedback, or our body's reaction, right? The actual science of it. And I think that's a low-hanging fruit in the ways of especially first responders, that if they feel like they're one direction towards everything that you're talking about is woo. Well, one thing we really can't argue about is data and the science of our biology, right? And so I think when you break it down that way, for probably not a lot of people listening to this, but certainly you interact with, folks listening, interact with those that might be more averse towards being open-minded to even the idea or notion of something like mindfulness or that term. But when you think about breath work, that might be a little woo, right? But okay, let's break it down more. Like, what are we talking about? We're talking about breathing. Is breathing helpful for your body? Yes. When you're stressed, do you breathe less? Do you know? Are you aware? Can you look up some studies? Just hit the search engine, right? Google like oxygen and brain health and brain performance. Okay, cool. Like, now we can use cool words like science and tactics and proficiency and optimization. And that's where people, I think, you start to get buy-in, because if you think about combatives, you think about firearms, stress inoculation, we want to promote oxygen intake, right? To promote your muscles need oxygen. Your brain is the big, the most calorie consuming organ in your body. And does that absolutely help you operate the best way in these critical, slivers of seconds moments? Then yes. Okay, cool. So you are actually with me. You are into everything we're talking about, which is inviting, intending, and kind of forcing at sometimes to take that pause, breathe, recognize your environment. And I love the connection to nature because we're all from nature. And tech is, Deana, you recognize some great tools where if people want that feedback, cool, you can use a wearable, you can track your sleep. If you're like me and you've dabbled and you're like, well, that actually makes me hyper focus and freak out when my sleep score is 60 and I actually felt like okay, and now I think that like I'm gonna have this garbage day. It's just not for me, right? But injecting these things and recognizing some tools, and maybe that's where we'll go next, is like, okay, how do we bring this all together? And something like for our personality types, myself as an example, I may have the best intention to go on a walk outside, with the dogs for X long, but based on what happens in the day and based on whether I was on call, that may not happen. But I'm going to set intention. And for me, I'm going to put it in my phone. So it's now in my calendar. Like tomorrow morning, I'm going on a walk and I'm going to go for at least 30 minutes, right? If I haven't been journaling, then I'm going to put in my calendar and write about gratitude. And that could be super simple. So even as everybody's kind of hinting at or explicitly saying you need a practice, I mean, let's think about the word ritual, right? And then it's like a rule. It's something to live by. And so I want to ask everybody, what are some of your rituals and some of the things you may suggest to coworkers, for Mark, or clients for Dr. or Deana, and we'll go there so people can start thinking about the things that they could inject into their day-to-day.
I think everyone's a little different, and I think people need to experiment and find what works for them. So for me, when like I ended up on stress leave, for those who don't know my story, and was pretty affected by stuff, and what I found is I had to like get rid of electronics at night. So I, again, back to hit rituals and routines and all that, no electronics after dinner. And what did I do? I took my dog for a walk every evening, and often I would try and do it with someone. So I'd have connection, I would have nature. So I think there's a time management aspect that you're basically saying, where you're scheduling things, which again goes back to Gil Martin, which is essentially what he advocates towards the end of the book. And I would also say make it easy. Like if you understand habits, and books like James Clear and Duhigg's got another book on habits, it's basically how do you make it so you'll do it, right? And so for me, if I'm going to get in, say, an ice bath, my goal is to get in for 10 seconds. I've never stayed in for only 10 seconds. But every time you're like, oh man, this is going to suck. This is going to be bad. And then you get in and you stay in for a minute or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. And then after you feel good because you did it. But it's that actually doing it can be hard. So just make it easy. It's like if the workout is the good thing for you, put your shoes right by your bed, put your shoes right by your door, whatever you need, but do something to make that habit easy for you. And yeah, for me, it's been nature, it's been connection, it's been a sauna has been an awesome one for me. So if anyone has access to a sauna, man, I highly recommend it. When I have a sauna at night, I sleep better. Like I don't know the science of how it all works, but trust me, it works. I think it warms you up and makes you cool yourself down and helps you sleep. So there's definitely lots of options. Those are the few that works well for me. And the last one I'd draw back to is even that intention. Like when I'm telling new recruits about it, it's like, understand it's happening. Like for so many of us, someone earlier said no one taught us. Like, yeah, no one taught me when I was a new cop, and it's what I desperately needed. But now we're trying to make that change for the next generation. And I know I've drawn on Gil Martin numerous times, but going back to that, like this is the story of the two dads at the end. What's the impact if you don't? Right? It's that the one dad disconnected from his family, and obviously with really negative outcomes. So I think we really can do better.
Those are really great examples. And I have heard that, I mean, I studied a lot of sleep because I was a terrible grave worker and had all the sleep issues. It wasn't until more recently that I'd heard about sleeping in cool environments, but it wasn't until more recently that it was the notion of heating your body up so that it can self-cool, right? And so more often, especially we're approaching winter at the time of this recording, more often, especially if I get home from work late, I'm just cold. Like I'm literally cold walking in the door. And so I'll take a hot shower, or hey, if you want to get bougie, like draw that bath and put in the salts. You got some magnesium in there, you got the eucalyptus or lavender, what have you. And yeah, just really heating my body up and then sleeping with more minimal covers. Like I've slept way better. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I mean, that is part of what we're talking about. Like, how do you help your body down regulate? And like, sleep is the ultimate daily rest ritual that should be a thing, not just this temporary pause button that I think that a lot of times, quote unquote, sleep or just passing out is like a pause button for our first responders.
And I'll be quick about it, but just how important it is for so many of you listening out there and so many of us. You're already going to be sleep deprived. You're already working shift work. You're already getting called out. You're already on call all the time. Like, cops have shorter life expectancies because of this. You're sacrificing your health, a piece of it, and a piece of your how long you'll live to do it. And that's the one thing you can control. Back to your breath. Like, use the tools you have. You give so much to your community, and know how important your breath work, how important your sleep is, and do everything you can to learn about it and to make the most of it, because it'll really have a long-term impact for your physical health, your mental health, all of that. So sorry, go ahead, Medina. I apologize for cutting you off.
No, all good. And just brought up another thought for me, but even, prevention or early intervention. So like the annual physical exams, I cannot tell you how many times in a briefing, I'm like, all right, who here has taken their physical exam within the last year? Maybe one or two hands. Some are like, oh, I did that when I got on the department. And it's like, if you get your annual physical and make sure your provider knows what you do. And so they're looking at like your metabolic functioning, looking at cortisol levels, thyroid, for guys, testosterone. And these could be indicators in addition to blood pressure, diabetes, sleep apnea, all of that. But if you're noticing, wait a minute, my levels are starting to not look good, that could also tune you in and provide some motivation, right? To start maybe doing some things, changing some things up to help your body out. And then Eric, you talked about the scheduling. So I'm a huge nerd when it comes to scheduling stuff. If it's not on my calendar, I'm probably not going to do it. But one thing my husband and I started doing late in his career was sharing a calendar on our phone. And one pickle we'd often get in is, he's thinking, I just had this crazy week. I'm exhausted. I cannot wait for my first day off to relax. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to have my weekend with my husband. I have a to-do list, right? So my expectation going into the weekend is, hey, we're going to do all these things, or I need you to do these things. And he's thinking, well, I just want to relax. And we would butt heads so many times. So even just putting on the calendar, I'll tell cops, if it's been a week or a day and going into the weekend, go ahead and just block out, even if it's 2 hours, 4 hours, if you needed a whole day of just relaxation time, or, however you want to say it. That way your spouse knows what to expect from you, like during that time period. And then it's your responsibility to do what you need to do, to use that time and get yourself ready to engage and recalibrate for being home with the family. Another thing that comes to mind is that 10-minute rule. And I can't remember, Eric, if we talked about it on the last podcast, but a way to communicate the decompression time. So rather than yell at each other or, get the glazed eye look, just say, hey, I need 10 minutes when I get home. And that is a simple way for your spouse to know you're going to need decompression time. The point isn't like your spouse isn't going to sit there with a timer for 10 minutes, but just knowing and front loading, this is what I'm going to need when I come home, whether it's a quick call, a text message. And then also, and I cannot remember where I heard this, it was some documentary or TV show I watched, but there was a cop and he was talking about mentally starting to shift gears from work to home. And he had some sort of token. It could be a coin, a photo, something on him, on his person while he was at work. And then at the end of his day, he would take that off, put that in his desk, lock it up, and mentally say, okay, all of that gunk, that work stuff, I'm going to leave that there. I'll pick that back up when I get to work. And so that's something I've shared with the cops that I work with. And even if let's say you have a take-home car, right? So then have some sort of, like at home, you have a tray where you just drop the keys or something, or a spot on your dresser of just when you get home, take that off, put that thing there and say, I'll pick that back up when I'm ready to go back to work. But just to start that very intentional shift and have something tangible to help you do that.
Yeah, I love those. You gave a lot of examples, and I'm not tracking them all right now, but we'll go with the last one, that token, right? And so it goes back to that ritual. And there's so much more mainstream information about sleep hygiene, right? So just for everyday people, because sleep is hard for everyday people, and it's like extra hard for us, so we need to pay extra attention, right? So a whole process, just like in expanding your bedtime routine, like you always brush your teeth, you always floss, you always wash your face, right? And then you just build off of that. And then with that, yeah, what are some things that calm you? What are, cutting down the electronics, maybe using blue light blocking glasses. But even like if we take that same type of methodology and we apply it to transitioning back home, I gave the example earlier about that car driver, expanding on Dr. Medina's example. But if we are in a work car, a marked car, if we're wearing that vest and you should have the radio on. You shouldn't be in La La Land, like head up in the clouds, because you could be a target. You might be flagged down to help somebody. So that's a real thing, right? But we can try to reduce some of the things. And for myself, I'll just admit it, like maybe shutting down, like not having Outlook open on my MDC, right? Maybe just CAD, maybe just what I really need if something happened, and then fully log out once I get home. But in that, recognizing that you have this opportunity, maybe it's just been, your household's been a wreck while you've been gone, but even taking a minute or two to do the Mr. Rogers, like, hey, you take off your
Yeah.
uniform in the garage. He had his like outside jacket, took it off, put on his inside cardigan, took off his outside shoes, put on his like indoor shoe. Like, shout out to Mr. Rogers. But you
Love
have
it.
that process, and it's kind of like, hey, I'm taking off that persona, that role, because you are, and we're not exactly the same person. We shouldn't be. Um, that is now being put away. That's going on the rack or on the shelf. And even like 2 minutes of just sitting there and kind of thinking about things, the house isn't going to burn down, right? If the kids have been absolute terrorists, like the house isn't going to burn down. And just for my own experience, like for my wife to recognize that for me to rush in with the wrong energy was not helpful, and her to share that with me as a new dad, that was huge. And just to give me permission, she's like, if you need to take time, take time. But I love, yeah, you did talk about that, Dr. Medina, in a prior conversation. And a lot of clinicians do recommend that. And a lot of first responders, experienced first responders, family members, like recommend communicating that through the day, maybe on the way home, maybe a simple text, maybe a code word or a number system of like, hey, I'm at a 2. You're like, okay, cool. Like, I'm at a 9, so you take your time and you don't you rush back here, right? I
Mhm.
love that. It's completely overlapping. Relationships are built on communication, and communication's built on intention, and it's all expectation setting, right? And so whether that's who we work with or who we're at home with, same rules apply. So no, thank you so much for that.
You nailed it when you said rituals, and I am just so in awe at how four of us who have never communicated together in a room are so on the same page, and we have such a similar perspective, and everyone is hitting all of the key markers. The number one of the big issues that our first responders have when cops come off duty and they get home, decision fatigue is a thing, right? Decision fatigue and having to make a decision, and having too many choices. So rituals eliminate that. And when you have routines and rituals, you won't have decision fatigue. Now, there's a little bit of a double-edged sword with that, because then rituals and routines can feel boring and mundane, but there's a sense of safety and connectedness that I think outweighs that. And when you're intentional and thinking about what you're grateful for, solidify and remind yourself that these rituals are for my safety, for my benefit, for the intention of connecting with my family. You mentioned, Dr. Medina, about an annual physical, and checking in. And there's a lot of markers for illness, and sometimes it's like, if we're not hitting the illness mark, we won't actually know if we're doing well or not. But if you get a good idea of what is normal for you, or what, how you're feeling, and what's normal, then you can monitor that. I found that I had to work with a naturopath doctor to really get to the bottom of some things. But I'll tell you this, there's one measurement that I think gets overlooked a lot, and that's triglycerides. High cortisol, high circulating cortisol will spike your triglycerides. I didn't know that until mine were off the charts. And I'm like, hold on a second. I thought I was relatively healthy. Why are my triglycerides off the chart? And honestly, the doctors were like, well, we don't really know. And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? So having worked with a naturopathic doctor, then I understood, oh, I get it. My cortisol is too high most of the time, spiking my triglycerides, making me at risk for cardiovascular events, right? Such a challenge. I would only add to bedtime rituals just to add what works for me. That warmth is huge, and I added to get a little warmth with red light therapy. So I do red light therapy every night, which I found is such a tremendous benefit. Silly as it sounds, I need emotional support background noise because I live alone. So I turn on Andy Griffith, the Andy Griffith Show. Let me tell
Oh,
you why I
wow.
like it.
Throwback.
I love it. It's black and white. There's no laugh tracks or switch or quick switching scenes. There's no major drama. Like the worst thing that happens is, Aunt B nipped at the cooking sherry on accident. Like it's so calming to my nervous system, and that's become part of my nightly routine because it just sort of like down regulates my nervous system. And for many, many months, actually many years, I was doing float therapy weekly. And that was a tremendous, tremendous support to my nervous system and even my muscular system. Much more effective for me than a massage. So float therapy, it's a little bit of a caution. I don't think everybody is well suited initially for float therapy because if you can't be alone in your head and in the silence, you won't do well. So you need a little preconditioning before getting into float therapy. But it is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you said that because I did it once off of Groupon. If, the younger people might not even know what Groupon is, but that was trippy. Like you're really cut off. I mean, you
You
could
have to
pick
be,
music, but it was like silence. And I think that says a lot, right? That years ago, my hyperactive brain, it probably still is. It is. But back then, not having a lot of the knowledge and maybe the mechanisms to
yeah.
get the most out of that experience, where I was like literally waiting. I was like, when can I be done? And I'm no quitter, so I'm not going to tap out, but it
Right,
became like a challenge where super
right.
trippy. Yeah. When your spine like all pops just because of the essential
Oh,
weightlessness. But no,
yes.
I love the example of, I love the example of the show, right? Very calming, very grounding for you. But then shout out for animals too, not just because my dogs ran in, but I was thinking
Yeah,
about that connection back to nature, and that is another aspect, right? For those that live alone. I recently heard this, I'm not sure if anyone else has, but there are studies that show that there's improved sleep for people that have dogs or sleep near dogs because of that. Going back to nature, like
it's
humans
a
just were safer.
co-regulation.
Yeah, when that
Hmm.
hypervigilance, right? You could down regulate knowing that your dog's going to pick up and perk up and bark or growl, so you can let your guard down. And I was like, I had never really thought about that. And having dogs in the household, like I know that's one reason why I love having dogs because of that. So I just wanted to offer that too, for folks that are solo, you got your animals, maybe your plants, right? Back to oxygen, back to living things. And because I wanted to mention it earlier, that moment of awe, right? That, what did you call it, Deana? Looking at the sky.
Gasp. I called it a gasp.
Yeah,
But
gasping.
it's
Yeah, like there's been a couple
awe-inspiring.
moments, yeah, in the last few weeks, and I'm not in sunny Southern California, up in Washington State, and Mark's up in the Great North. But even at night, or it was not night; it was really early morning, but it was so dark, where the moon was shooting through these crazy contrasting clouds, where I literally
Stunning.
said, "Wow!" I was totally by myself, like just with dogs, but I was like, "Wow!" And I'm like, there's been a couple moments when I take a moment on the drive and I just get out of my head and I just look outside at the trees or like the mountain range. I'm like, whoa, that's nuts. That's awesome. And it goes
Yeah.
back to gratitude, right? So we don't have to think super hard about things that are awesome. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the things we come up with aren't super awesome, but it's a start, and that can be part of your ritual as well. We want to give tangible takeaways. I'd love to get to the point where at roll call a crew, and maybe there's crews somewhere that do it, right? Like the start of their day, they all talk about something awesome, right? They all like share their gratitude for the day. They're like, all right, let's go kick some ass. Like,
Yeah,
what a
let's
way to
normalize
start the
that.
shift. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there's so much value in OIS, kind of body worn camera for tactics. It's a really interesting way to start the day, though, watching somebody, shoot and kill somebody in the theme of safety. Like, and I'm not trying to distance listeners. Like, this is something we have to do, but how does that start you out? And is there a better way, or is there a way we can toggle that? Maybe some roll calls you do that, and some roll calls you really focus on getting grounded and talk about how you're going to set that intention, right? To down regulate yourself throughout the day. Maybe do that buddy check throughout the day. Maybe tap your buddy on the shoulder, be like, hey, let's go roll to the parking lot and just take a moment, just shoot the breeze, because that's helpful too. So I'm going to pass the mic. Mark.
Yeah,
you're
I'll
up.
jump in, man, with what you just said of like a roll call. Because I guess, I've mentioned Gil Martin several times, but he basically describes the history of cynicism in police culture and how problematic it's been. If I had to summarize, hypervigilance is probably one part, but cynicism is the big part. And you're basically saying, what if we did something to counteract that instead of just the physical danger? And we know it's the psychological danger, the mental danger, all that's been killing more officers than the physical danger. But for so long, we've really neglected it. And I've looked through some of our training where less than 1% will be on mental health, even though that's really what's more than half of our officers have died from. And how do we shift that? How do we shift that culture? And I think it takes leaders like yourself, Eric, within the culture who are respected to normalize it. Be like, hey guys, let's try this. What do you guys say? Let's give it a try. And when you already have that trust built within the culture, then it's like, okay. Like, and I'll say when I started journaling, the only reason I did was because one of my mentors was suggesting I try it. That I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't heard it from him. So that was a big deal for me. And I'd say maybe my challenge to you, man, is think of maybe how you could apply that in some way in your workspace this year. Like, can you try that with one of your squads? Can you talk to some of your sergeants and say, hey guys, anybody willing to try this? Let's try once a month and let's see what happens. And honestly, I think you'll get positive feedback if you do.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will respond, and I appreciate the compliment in there. And it is uncomfortable to do new things, right? It's one thing to talk about, it's next to roll it out. But I do have sergeants that do a great job where it's not just, from the outside you could say like doom and gloom, right? It does prime your nervous system a certain way if that's all you're doing, if that's all you're using roll call for. But a lot do debrief and not just use of force stuff, right? And sometimes it is more stress based, and we have had that following incidents. At the same time, a great practice that I love seeing and seeing socialized is getting in the gym for briefing, right? So maybe there is no video you have to watch. You don't need the apparatus. So you go to the gym, you tell everyone you're meeting there, and then you just you read off the emails that you have to pass on for extra patrol or the information coming down the pipe, and then you get some movement in, right? And sometimes it's a circuit, we're going to do it as a crew. Some teams, like, they just kind of break off and they do their own thing. Someone's lifting over here, someone's on the rower, they're all shooting the breeze, they're all catching up, just connecting as a team. I mean, there's so much value in that. So I'm glad you brought that up, because it doesn't have to be what some people may fear, maybe not be ready for, but I do know that there's plenty of agencies that get together, they start their day with yoga and a breathing practice, and that's great too.
Now, keep in mind, some agencies aren't allowed to work out on duty, but certainly something you can
It is, yeah.
add in a little bit before, right?
Yeah, and we need to buck that. We need to
Seriously.
break that. Whatever it
Seriously.
is, it's asinine. I've said that before, but
Yeah.
I think that it is worth saying, because the folks that are doing the job today are going to be the leaders of tomorrow. Frankly, me and Mark have the same time on, and I think that our opinions are not that valid. I think that we can keep saying things from a place of confidence and competence, and really it's for those following us that are going to be able to make some really big moves. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up too, because we got to challenge those notions for sure.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's for us to change it. Like, I think we can, in all honesty. And I think it's important that we talk about it. And I don't want to say calling it out is the right word, but just create a better future and help them understand the long-term cost. Like, I need to squeeze every hour out of my people. Okay, well, what does that turn into for your off-duty sick time and for, all the retention and hiring new people? Like, you can't afford the cost you're paying because of that really bad policy. For anyone out there still in a department like that, and it doesn't need to be that way. It takes people going to the union and advocating and saying, hey, we don't want this. And I came from a very progressive department that had a sleeping pod that invested in their people and realized we get more out in the long term if we treat our people really well. And I think we want
Mhm.
to shift our culture away from the, I don't know the right term, but like command and control, just always trying to squeeze a little bit more, to just investing in people and realizing healthy cops will do a good job. They'll interact well with the community and everyone will win.
Yeah, it's like a pay now or pay later.
Yeah, and
Oh, yeah.
invest in
Big time.
assets, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about wellness of the agency as an investment in our assets, right? If I'm a number,
Yeah.
you paid to hire me, how about invest in me and
Mhm.
protect your investment, right? We service vehicles, we service equipment, we buy new equipment, but what about this? What about
Mhm.
me? What about, right? I am producing for you. So what investment are you producing in me, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what costs more, the car or the recruit that you paid 2 years to get them serviceable and actually, like, decent at most calls, but still having to phone
Exactly.
a friend, phone the sarge, like, no, like, our people, like, a 3-year officer, the amount of money and training that's gone into that person, not just money, but sometimes that's what speaks, right? Like, I know everyone on
Absolutely.
this and listening in, like, cares about the person, beyond the badge, right? But, yeah, I love that we spent the bulk of this conversation talking about what we did, but I'm also loving that we also brought up something as hopefully simple, but low hanging as like movement, right? Decompressing. I love the fact I'm like that proud kind of parent feeling when I hear about an officer being in kind of a hairy situation and then hearing the sergeant later tell me that they sent him off. I'm like, how are they doing? And they're like, well, I kind of just sent him to the sub so he could hit the gym because that's what that officer loves. And I'm like, yes, like that's the thing, right? Like just pull him out of service like 10, 15 minutes. I love the sleep aspect. There's a lot of departments that are getting better about unofficially, even the boss is saying, hey, yeah, you have to shut eye, like cool, that's a step in the right direction. But then you got leaders like Chief Marsha Harden that I'm excited to interview, Albany, Oregon, that comes from Washington State, but she has a sleep policy, and other agencies have sleep policies where it involves a sergeant. It's like, hey, would you rather someone drive into a ditch or just like get a cat nap? And there's a lot of performance science that supports that quick nap, and we know what the stakes are. The stakes are life and death of someone just driving to a ditch or off into a gully, or having to decide whether or not to pull the trigger, right? Or for fire, like there's a lot of translations to like reading all these valves. Like I'm not a valve technical mechanical brain person, but those are really huge implications if you do it wrong. And yet here we are, right? Extremely under recovered, extremely overstressed. I know we could go for hours and hours on this topic because I was confident this is going to be fantastic, but I just want to throw that out too. So another nod of the things that we can think about from varying perspectives and some of these traditional concepts that we need to challenge and progress past. I'd love to go around the room and just kind of get some closing thoughts. Like I said, I know we could go a super long time and maybe we'll just have to revisit this topic with the panel, but big takeaways or maybe what you'd like to leave the listeners with as far as tangible tips.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, communication, right? Whether that's with your partners at home, your partners at work. And then also, this is an issue where I'm at with all of the mandatory overtime and staffing shortages. And it's really easy to get yourself sucked into kind of that victim mindset. This department doesn't care about me. And you spend all of this time and energy just being upset. And it's kind of like, what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to take care of your partners? Because you can still do that. That's still within your control. And educating yourself, right? So some of the different topics we talked about, breathing, sleep, sauna, cold plunge, all of these things, there's reasons why these things exist and why they're utilized. And if you can just maintain a perspective to essentially say, okay, what do I need to learn how to optimize my brain and body, whatever that looks like. And then having those, annual or as needed kind of recalibrations or tune-ups. I don't think it's a one and done, right? I'm going to breathe and then it's fine. It's kind of constantly expanding the knowledge base and the tools.
Yeah, absolutely. Deana.
I wanted to say that the field of sports psychology and high level sportsmanship, I'm talking NBA, NFL, like all of this, they know how much psychology goes into what they do. They value, they put money to this. They spend their life in mindfulness and understanding how their body and their psychology all go to optimal performance. And it's so crazy to me that we're just now making a headway in the law enforcement space. Like, really? Why are we so behind the times? But just to simplify it and put an exclamation point on it, your optimal performance will require your mindfulness. And this wellness to get to optimal performance is a journey. It's a journey of discovery. It's a journey of this biofeedback and understanding what your body is communicating to your mind, what your behavior is doing, and asking yourself the question, is it working for me? Is my life sustainable the way it is? And if it isn't, course correct immediately. And to simplify the term mindfulness, paying attention on purpose without judgment. That, and you pay attention to everything else out there all of the time. But when do you turn that mindfulness or that paying attention internally, paying attention to your own life, your own body, your own behavior, your thoughts, what you're consuming, all of it. And that's where the secret sauce is going to be for optimal performance.
Yeah, that you put that so well, right? Just turning up that dial on what's going on. What are you feeling? And yeah, as my chaplain at my home base, Chaplain Pat Ellis is like, "Oh no, not the F word feelings. Like we hate those." But
That's
yeah, no,
awesome.
thank you,
Yeah,
Deana.
yeah,
All right,
yeah.
Mark.
Yeah, well, thank you. So many great insights from this. So thank you. I've learned from everyone here. I think I'll leave everyone with just how important this is. We use the term officer safety. That's the answer to everything in policing. Consider this officer safety. This is your health. This is your longevity. This is your connection with your family. This is why we do what we do. This is why we put our lives on the line and go do dangerous and hard things. And I would put it over to each of you listening for the personal responsibility. No one's coming to do this for you. You, much like once you graduate the academy, you need to maintain your physical health. You need to be proactive and keep doing it. You need to also intentionally do this and find what works for you. Be willing to try things. I learned to love yoga and gardening and all these things. Journaling, I never would have thought I would try. And Deana, you said, I think it was you who said it was the Andy Griffith show or something that is one of your things. I never would have thought I'd hear that from someone, but it works for you. So for those out there listening, I challenge you to go try something. Try something you heard here today, schedule it. Put it in your calendar, make a commitment, your first day off or after shift or swing shift or whatever, that you're going to try a nature walk, that you're going to watch a sunset, that you're going to go somewhere for a sauna, or whatever you think. Maybe it's the Andy Griffith show. Whatever you think will help you. My challenge to you is to take one thing out of this that you've heard from all these experts and apply it in your life.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's all the things that we struggle with, right? Finding that balance, or as I say more frequently now, that illusion of balance. But rather than trying to exist in this impossible state of balance, it's recognizing that our lives, especially in modernity and first responder life, it gets super imbalanced. So it's just being intentional, as Deana put it, to put stuff back on that high side of the scale when you can. So injecting little weights to put up there throughout your day, and then for sure on your weekends, right? Making these non-negotiables. And I'm building a course, Get Gritty, essentially helping all these things, right? All these different health pillars, so that we can share all these insights, and just get better every day for ourselves and for our families, for our teams. That's what this is all about. So I appreciate all you for your time and your I say, like, for lack of better words, the iron sharpening iron in all these respects. We're all so aligned in what we need at first responder culture. So I really appreciate not just your expertise, but your personal insights as well. So I'm just going to ask you all to go around the room so people can hear where they can find you, and get in touch with you. So Dr. Medina, why don't we start with you? And oh yeah, and please, for the authors, share your books and where people can find those.
Sure. So my website, it's the easiest way to get a hold of me through that. It's www.drbaumgart.com. Instagram's at Dr_Baumgart. And then my LinkedIn's Medina Baumgart. My book, Surviving Retirement, Finding Purpose and Fulfillment Beyond the Badge, is on Amazon and other online book retailers.
Awesome. Deana?
Yeah, I'm at copshrink.com. I'm on Instagram as copshrink. On LinkedIn, it's Deana Kahle. You can find me at any one of those places.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us for the first time. And all the spelling and all the links will be in the show notes. And Mark, last but not least.
Sure. Yeah, Mark Bouchard. I got a website. It's just my name, Mark with a K, M-A-R-K, and then Bouchard, B-O-U-C-H-A-R-D. It's .ca because I'm up here in Canada. I have a book, Setting My Sights on Stigma, Thoughts from an Injured Mind, which is a little bit about my mental health injury, stress leave, etc., and more meant to be the breadcrumbs of how I helped heal myself and how I got a lot better, hoping to help pass it on to the next generation. So thank you for the chance to learn from everyone, and thanks for having me on, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. And as always, please share this episode, right? And it should go without saying, but if you got value from this, please share it with somebody else. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to take it to the socials, but I love it if you do. Any sharing does truly help our shared mission to elevate and help police culture and individuals, as well as truly helping the show grow and helping people get in front of it or get it in front of people. So thank you all again so much for your time. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.